All right, so are you ready to like really dig into the Book of Esther?
Always.
Yeah, but we're not talking like the basic Purim story here.
Right.
We're going deep.
Love it.
We're using excerpts from this book by Jacob Hoschander.
Oh, yeah.
It's called The Book of Esther in the Light of History.
Nice.
And it's going to kind of blow your mind about the whole Persian court thing.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, arranged marriages and hidden identities and power struggles and like the whole thing. So like, was Esther really this nice girl?
Right.
Or is there more to it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And did the Jews like really escape because of divine intervention?
Okay.
Or was there something else going on?
Yeah, there's always more to the story.
So like one of the first things that Hoschander does is he questions some of the stuff in the book.
Okay.
Like right off the bat.
Like what?
Well, for example.
Yeah.
Mordecai.
Mordecai, yeah.
He's supposed to be a direct descendant of King Saul.
Right, which would make him...
But like if you do the math, he'd have to be over 100 years old.
Exactly. It's like, wait a minute.
During the events of the story.
Yeah. Not very likely.
Not really.
So what does Hoschander say about that?
Well, he says, maybe it's a scribal error.
Could be. Those things happen.
But he also says, like, what if it was intentional?
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, like to emphasize how different Mordecai and Haman were.
To set them up as opposites.
Yeah.
Like that.
So that brings us to Haman.
Okay, here we go. Everyone's favorite villain.
Right. Like, we think of him as the bad guy.
Total bad guy.
But Hoschander, like, throws a curveball.
Oh. Tell me more.
He says Haman probably wasn't even an Amalekite.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So who does he think he was?
Maybe Persian.
Okay.
Or Elamite.
Huh. Interesting.
And his name, Haman, might even be connected to this Elamite deity, like Haman.
A deity. Okay, now I'm really curious.
But like, here's the really crazy part.
All right, lay it on me.
Hoschander suggests Haman might have been a religious reformer.
A what?
Like someone trying to improve things.
A reformer. Haman. That doesn't sound like the guy who wants to wipe out the Jews.
I know, right?
So how does that fit in?
Okay, so during this time, King Artaxerxes II, he introduces this goddess, Anahita, into Zoroastrianism.
So you've got this new goddess.
Right, and this kind of forces the Jews to acknowledge a deity that's not their own god.
Right, which could definitely lead to some tension.
Major tension, yeah. So basically, the conflict isn't just about like race or ethnicity.
It's deeper than that.
It's religious.
Okay, so that puts a whole new spin on things.
Totally changes how you see the whole story.
So is Haman trying to like force everyone into this new religion?
It's possible.
Huh?
Like maybe he's trying to unify the empire under this like reformed Zoroastrianism.
Interesting. So he's not necessarily out to get the Jews specifically.
Maybe not.
Wow. That's a lot to think about.
It is. So now I'm wondering, like, where does Esther fit into all of this?
Yeah, good question. What's her role in all this religious and political drama?
Right. Was she just a pawn in this bigger game?
Like, was she a willing participant? Or did she have her own agenda?
Exactly. And like Hoschander points out that Esther's Jewish identity was a secret.
It was. She was hiding a huge part of herself.
And she wasn't exactly thrilled about, stepping in to help.
So what was holding her back? Fear? Ambition? Maybe a bit of both?
Right. Like, was she scared for her own safety?
She was definitely in a precarious position.
Or did she have some kind of, like, ambition?
Maybe she saw a chance to gain even more power.
Or maybe she genuinely cared about her people, but was also afraid.
It's hard to say for sure. The text leaves a lot open to interpretation.
So, like, it's not as simple as we might think.
Definitely not. Esther's a much more complex character than we give her credit for.
Yeah, her motives are, like, really ambiguous.
And that's what makes her so interesting.
It's not just a straightforward story of a beautiful queen saving the day.
There's a lot going on beneath the surface. Secrets, power plays, internal conflict. It's fascinating.
Totally. And speaking of power plays, we can't ignore the role of wine in this whole thing.
Oh, yes. Wine definitely plays a big part in the Book of Esther.
Yeah, like Artaxerxes' decisions seem to be
influenced by how much he's had to drink.
Yeah, shall we say.
It wouldn't be the first time a ruler's judgment was clouded by a little too much wine.
Right. And remember that scene where Esther accuses Haman?
Oh, yeah, that's a dramatic one.
And the king, like, immediately believes her?
Doesn't even hesitate.
Maybe he wasn't thinking clearly.
Or maybe he was just looking for an excuse to get rid of Haman. We know he was a suspicious guy, especially after a night of indulging.
Yeah.
And don't forget, this is the same king who had Tissaphernes executed.
Oh, right, Tissaphernes.
Another powerful figure who fell out of favor. Apparently, all it took were some whispers in the king's ear, and boom, head chopped off.
So, like, maybe Haman's downfall wasn't all about Esther's bravery.
Could have been a combination of factors.
Yeah.
Esther's accusation, the king's paranoia, maybe even a hangover. Who knows?
Right, like he was probably just looking for an excuse.
Exactly. It really shows you how precarious power was in the Persian court. One wrong move, and you were out.
So, like, now I'm thinking about Purim.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about that. How does the festival fit into all of this?
Well, it's not as straightforward as we might think.
It never is.
I know, right? So, Hoschander points out that Purim was established by Mordecai and Esther,
Okay.
not religious authorities.
Interesting. So it's not like a divinely ordained holiday. It's something they created themselves.
Exactly. And get this.
Yeah.
There are a lot of similarities between Purim and this Persian festival called Farwardigan.
Farwardigan.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that one.
It's a festival that celebrates, like, the spirits of the dead.
Oh, wow. So maybe there's some connection there.
Yeah, like, could Purim have been influenced by this Persian festival?
Like a cultural exchange or even appropriation?
Yeah.
It's possible. It wouldn't be the first time a culture adopted elements from another.
Right. And then there's the Sophrim.
The scribes.
Yeah. They later formalized Purim and made it a part of, like, Jewish tradition.
Interesting. So maybe they were trying to distance it from its Persian origins?
Yeah, like maybe they were trying to make it more Jewish.
Kind of like cleaning up the messy parts of history.
It's fascinating, right, to see how these cultural and religious practices change over time. Okay, so one last thing about Hoschander.
All right. What else did he dig up?
Well, he looks at the Hebrew text of Esther.
You mean the Masoretic text?
Yeah, and he points out some inconsistencies.
So he's going deep into the text itself, looking for clues.
Yeah, and he thinks there might be some errors.
Errors? Like what? Like this one phrase that keeps getting repeated. What phrase?
And had cast per.
And had cast per.
That does sound a little odd.
Yeah, like maybe it was added later.
Or maybe it was a mistake by a scribe. Those things happen, you know?
Yeah.
Especially when you're copying scrolls by hand.
Right. So these like textual issues could be why there are so many different interpretations of the story.
That makes sense. If the text itself is ambiguous, then people are going to fill in the blanks with their own understanding.
Exactly.
It's like a giant puzzle where some of the pieces are missing. We have to use our imagination and our knowledge of the historical context to try and figure out the full picture.
This has been amazing.
It has. We've gone way beyond the simple good versus evil narrative.
Right.
It's like we're seeing the Book of Esther in a whole new light. There's political intrigue, religious tension, these complex characters with hidden motives.
And don't forget the wine.
Oh, yes. Can't forget the wine. It's a reminder that these ancient figures were just as human as we are, with all their flaws and foibles. It's like we've been watching this story in black and white, and now suddenly we're seeing it in full color.
It's a great analogy. And it really makes you appreciate the power of historical analysis. It's not about debunking the story or saying it's not true. It's about adding layers of understanding and context.
Totally. And it makes those little details we might have overlooked before, like Mordecai's age or the similarities with that Persian festival, they suddenly become clues to a much bigger picture.
Right. They're not just random oddities, they're windows into the world of the Persian Empire. We see the religious tensions, the political maneuvering, the way power could shift in an instant. It's like suddenly seeing the Book of Esther in 3D.
So, like, what are some key takeaways from all of this? What should our listener be thinking about?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the Book of Esther, like so much of history, is more complex and fascinating than we often realize. It's a story worth revisiting, worth digging into with a critical and curious mind.
I totally agree. And maybe by understanding the past, we can gain a little more insight into the complexities of our own present. After all, the themes of religious intolerance, political maneuvering, and the courage to stand up for what you believe in, those are still very much relevant today.
Well said. And on that note,
it's like we've been watching the Book of Esther in black and white, and now suddenly we're seeing it in full color.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it really makes you appreciate the power of like historical analysis.
Yeah.
It's not about like debunking the story or saying it's not true.
Right.
It's about adding these layers of understanding and context.
Speaking of adding layers, let's go back to Haman for a sec.
Okay.
You mentioned that whole thing about him being a religious reformer.
Right.
It's such a different take on this character.
It is.
We always think of him as like the villain.
Right, exactly.
Right.
He's usually portrayed as this evil mastermind, wants to wipe out the Jews.
Right.
Just out of pure hatred.
Just because he's evil.
Yeah.
But like, if you consider the historical context, it's possible he was motivated by this desire for religious unity within the Persian Empire.
Within the empire, yeah.
So instead of being driven by like malice, he might have genuinely believed he was doing what was best for the empire.
Exactly. And that's what makes Hoschander's analysis so compelling.
Yeah.
He's not just presenting like a new set of facts.
Right.
He's encouraging us to reconsider our assumptions.
Yeah.
And to look at the story from a different perspective. It's about seeing the nuances and complexities that are often hidden beneath the surface.
It really makes you wonder if that line between hero and villain is always so clear-cut.
Absolutely. And that's what makes studying history so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing dates and names.
Right.
It's about understanding the motivations and forces that shape the events of the past.
All right, let's talk about Esther for a minute.
Okay.
I have to admit, I always thought of her as kind of a passive character.
Okay.
Like the beautiful queen who just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
I think a lot of people have that image of Esther.
Yeah.
But Hoschander presents a much more complex portrait.
Okay.
He points out her hidden identity.
Right.
Her initial reluctance to get involved.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what was going through her mind.
Yeah, right. Like, was she afraid? Ambitious?
Yeah.
Torn between her loyalty to her people
and
her position in the court.
Exactly. And the text doesn't give us any easy answers.
Nope.
It's up to us as readers to grapple with those ambiguities.
Yeah.
To consider the different possibilities.
Yeah, it's almost like Esther is a puzzle.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what this whole deep dive has been about, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We've used Hoschander's historical analysis to uncover those hidden layers of meaning in the Book of Esther.
Yeah.
To move beyond that simple good versus evil narrative.
Yeah.
We've explored those seemingly improbable genealogical claims.
Yeah.
The religious tensions simmering beneath the surface.
Right.
The power dynamics at play in the Persian court.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget the role of wine.
Right.
Who knew ancient kings were so susceptible to a little overindulgence.
So much of what we might have skimmed over before, like Mordecai's seemingly impossible age, or the similarities between Purim and that Persian festival, they suddenly become clues to a much bigger picture.
Right. They're not just random oddities. They're windows into the world of the Persian Empire.
Right.
We see the religious tensions, the political maneuvering.
Yeah.
It's like suddenly seeing the Book of Esther in 3D.
So what are some key takeaways from all this?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the Book of Esther, like so much of history, is more complex and fascinating than we often realize.
I totally agree.
It's a story worth revisiting, worth digging into with a critical and curious mind.
And maybe by understanding the past, we can gain a little more insight into the complexities of our own present. After all the themes of religious intolerance, political maneuvering, and the courage to stand up for what you believe in, those are still very much relevant today.
Well said. And on that note.
Yeah, it's amazing how a story we might think we know so well can like reveal so much more when we dig a little deeper.
It really is.
I have to say, this whole deep dive has made me want to go back and reread the Book of Esther with fresh eyes.
I think that's the best possible outcome.
Yeah.
Hoschander's work isn't meant to like replace the traditional interpretations.
Right.
But to enrich them.
Yeah.
To give us a broader perspective, a deeper understanding of the historical and cultural forces that shapes this text.
And you know, it makes me think about how we approach history in general.
Yeah.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of thinking about the past as this like fixed, unchanging thing.
Yeah, just a collection of facts and dates.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that.
Right. But really, history is a conversation.
It is. It's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
It's constantly being reinterpreted and re-examined
Right.
as new evidence emerges and new perspectives come to light.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying history so exciting.
Right. It's a dynamic process, not a static one.
Yeah.
And each generation brings its own questions and insights to the table.
So for our listener who might be feeling a little overwhelmed
Yeah.
by all this new information.
It's a lot to take in, for sure.
Yeah. What's the one thing you want them to take away from this deep dive?
I think the most important takeaway is the value of critical thinking.
Ooh, that's good.
Don't just accept things at face value.
Yeah.
Whether it's a historical narrative,
Right.
a news article,
Mhm.
or even a casual conversation.
Ooh, yeah.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Consider different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Be open to the possibility
Uh-huh.
that there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
That's such a valuable lesson, not just for understanding history,
Oh.
but for navigating the world in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in this age of information overload,
Mhm.
it's more important than ever
Yeah.
to cultivate those critical thinking skills.
Couldn't agree more.
And I think the Book of Esther, with all its complexities and
Mhm.
ambiguities,
It's a perfect example.
is a perfect example of why those skills are so essential.
Totally.
Well, on that note,
Yeah.
I think we've reached the end of our deep dive
I think so.
into the Book of Esther.
It's been a journey.
It's been an incredible journey,
It has.
and I hope our listener has found it as thought-provoking as I have.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you.
Likewise, and to our listener, if you're interested in exploring this topic further,
Yeah.
I highly recommend checking out Jacob Hoschander's book,
Great book.
The Book of Esther in the Light of History.
A classic.
It's a fascinating read
It is.
that will give you a whole new appreciation for
Absolutely.
this ancient and enduring story.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.
Yeah, there's always more to discover.
Always.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.